Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great, Eric. How about you?
Doing fantastic. Here in the Northeast, we are digging out of snow after snow after snow.
Yeah, last winter wasn't that bad, and up until a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't too bad here yet either. But it's only February; it's a short month, and we shall see what happens. But one day closer to spring. So
Absolutely. I think over the last week and a half, I've shoveled about a little under 2.5 feet of snow, and we've got more coming down the pipe later in the week. So we'll see what happens.
Yep, I enjoy looking out my window, watching the plow do the work for me. I'm too old for that.
All right. So, Chip, why don't you introduce our guest this week?
Yeah, actually, if I was shoveling, I'd probably have to go see Brian Nardi every single day. Dr. Brian Nardi is a friend of mine who I've met in the early 2000s, I think, at a BNI meeting. He was in our chapter, and he's a chiropractor here in Avon. He's my chiropractor, has been for years, although I haven't been for a while until this year. But what really amazed me is Brian was very, very young when he started. And at the first BNI meeting that I was at where I met him, I'll never forget his commercial. I always thought that chiropractors were there where if you had a kink in your back or whatever, you just went in there and they pushed it and you felt good for a while and so on. Brian stood up the very first day and he said, your brain runs your body through the central nervous system, which goes through your spine. And if something is wrong with your spine, something is wrong with you. Talk about the misconception that I and a whole lot of other people had. It was just amazing. And, I started seeing Brian after that. And Brian has an amazing story. So why don't I bring Dr. Nardi on here? And basically, you're doing what cured you when you were very young. So, Brian, tell us all about your journey and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chip and Eric. I appreciate you having me on here today. And Chip, that was a wonderful introduction. I'm surprised that you remember that after almost 20 years. That's wonderful. It's always great to have a lasting impact on other people's lives. So my story real quickly is very simple. When I was growing up, I suffered with asthma. And when I got into college, a friend of mine who was a teaching assistant looked at me and said, you need to go see my chiropractor. And like a lot of people, I looked at him as like, you got to be crazy. How is that going to happen? Chiropractic for headaches and back pain and things like that. And he said, no, your brain controls everything in your body. And if when you start getting adjusted, it'll affect the nerves and your body can heal itself. And so I started getting adjusted. And about a year later or so, I threw away all my medications. And I can count on one hand the number of individual pills I've taken in the last 25 years or so. And so with that, I subsequently healed a stomach ulcer through chiropractic care. And again, no drugs, no surgery. That stuff failed me. And so for me, I was always about like, how do I go about doing something? How am I going about doing it? I was never big on being told what to do. We all have to take advice and we all have to follow the rules to a certain extent. And when things don't work, I start asking questions. And with me and my health, because I wasn't getting where I wanted to go with the asthma and subsequently with the ulcer, I started asking different questions. And that led me down the road of chiropractic. And here I am for the last 18 years or so, helping people who think like I think and getting the results that they want when they failed in other avenues.
Yeah, and you have a very holistic approach to it because, basically it's healing and you have positive sayings all over your office, which is wonderful to motivate people. But the main thing is you talk about, all you're doing is the physical thing and the rest of it is up to people. So you very, very much concentrate on mindset. When people are first signing up for your services and so on and so forth, there's a huge emphasis on that because basically rather than you being the doctor and them the patient, it's you're in this together, and they got to do their part of the deal too.
That's correct. We tell all of our folks, we can do 75% of the work on the tables when they come in, but the other 25% they're going to need to be doing at home. And that comes not only from the things that we give them to do, but it also has to do with what's going on between the ears. What we do in the office is correcting the subluxation. And when you break that word down, it means less light, or a condition of less light. And what's the light going on in your life? What's the light going on in your mind? And the way we think is one of the causes of a subluxation, of which there are three: traumas, which are obvious things that we can look into, like sports injuries and motor vehicle accidents. And then there's toxins. What are we putting into our body that we shouldn't be? Then it's the third one, which is called autosuggestion, or to simplify that would be the stress, and the stresses that we put onto ourselves. So the way that we think has a lot to do with the way that we feel and the health that we get to exemplify. And so when we're thinking positively, when we're thinking good thoughts, when we're thinking healthy, then we're going to be able to produce good things and healthy things, because we're going to take healthy actions, and we're going to ask health-related questions that produce health, as opposed to what we traditionally do in America, which is always about the sickness. Tell me about the sickness. Tell me about the disease. Tell me about what's going on with you, which just gets us to focus more and more on the sickness and the disease, as opposed to the health, which is the result that we actually want. Because we know that which we think about is what we receive, right? What we think about, what we think about is what we bring about. And so we always have to be thinking about where it is that we want to be going, whether it's healthcare or business or school, or with our own families, So we always got to be asking those questions and thinking about our goal and our target, where it is that we want to go, and then make sure we're doing things that are going to get us there, as opposed to the opposite direction.
Yeah, you just said something very interesting. I'd like you to expand upon it. The American healthcare system is really more of a sick care system than healthcare. So
yeah.
How do you approach this, and what can we do to really turn people's mindset around and have them focus more on well care or health care than the sick care that we have now?
That's a great question. That's really what we do in chiropractic. I mean, it really starts with us as practitioners, and those of us who have kind of figured that out, because the medical system really is a sick care system, and we do need that. If I'm in a motor vehicle accident, or if I'm having a heart attack, there's no place I'd rather be than right here in America, because we are prepared best of all in all the countries of the world for those types of situations. But when it comes to being healthy, we have to start with ourselves. We have to be our own advocates for what it is that we want, and for where it is that we want to go. And so as a practitioner, it really starts with me, and not focusing on the sickness, focusing on the disease. And, as a chiropractor, most of what we see is related to aches and pains of the body, be it back pain or headaches or neck pains, what have you. But making sure that I'm talking and speaking in a way that is reminding people it's about the mindset rather than the physical problem. Because when we look at health, there's really three components of life, okay? We've got a mental component, we've got a spiritual component, and we've got a physical component. And all three of those are affecting each other. And as a cycle, if you will, anytime we break that cycle, it's going to affect the others. So we could look at that arm between the physical and the mental, and if there's a break in that, well, once we repair that, then the two are going to reconnect, and that's going to help both, because everything in life is about connection. And so whether it's a relationship that we have with a family member or a spouse or a friend, or in my office, the relationships that I have with our patients, is always making sure that we're in communication between those three: physical, mental, and spiritual components. And so keeping those connections is what's going to help us lead us down that road. And when we look at our medical profession, they especially take the spiritual component out. Um, Primary focus in medicine obviously is the physical component, and there's so much more research and evidence out there nowadays about the mental component that they're focusing more on that. And so we're getting those two pieces together. With that spiritual component, where is it that we're coming from? What is it that we've got going on internally for ourselves? What is it that motivates us and drives us through our years and through our days on an individual basis? Because that's that spiritual component. And we can throw in things like religion for that. But you know what? What is it that drives us to be the best person that we can be? What is it that makes us who we are? When you look at things like self-confidence, being able to speak your words, being able to act in a manner that is consistent morally, mentally with who you are and you know yourself to be. You know, the maturity process, between the difference between a young person and somebody who is more mature has a lot to do with that self-confidence piece. And so for those of us who have figured out how the system works and being willing to step out of the system and say, okay, what is it about this person that is missing? Or what is it about this person that they are that we can help them figure out if they haven't figured that thing out yet? Or take that thing and just make sure that they're focusing on it, because that's the thing that's going to heal them. And so healing is always about the individual. It's never about the system. And so we always got to make sure that we're able to take that down to the person and what is it that makes them tick.
Yeah, and basically a lot of what you do is you're a coach too. I mean, you're helping people get through the different things there. And for those of you who haven't been to a chiropractor out there, I imagine it's pretty similar as far as getting started with whoever you're going to. But you know, what Dr. Nardi starts you out with is like an assessment tour. You answer a bunch of questions if there's particular problems that you have going on, and so on and so forth. And then he'll sit down with you and go over all those different things. And the new way that you do the exam now versus when I first saw you back in the early 2000s is just amazing, where he just goes down your spine with this little thing and you see it right on there, and basically everything is numbered and this and that, whatever. And he just reviews the whole thing with you. And if you have particular things going on, he can point that right out to you on the screen. And then what happens is you get into a program and, you know, away you go. So you want to talk a little bit about the orientation process there, Dr. Nardi?
Yeah, that whole process. So, you know, when folks first come in, like with any healthcare professional, we're going to ask a series of questions and pertaining to what it is that brought them or drove them into our office. And for me, the biggest questions are, number one, there are two really. The first is, what are your fears about health and what are your fears about chiropractic? And number two is, what are your goals for your care? Because the most common thing that people come in with is some amount of pain, be it mental, emotional, physical pain. But nobody likes to be in pain, and it's the why that matters most. And so I want to know what their reason is for being in here, not motivation, but what's their inspiration? What is it that they're looking for? And again, that can be a connection thing. That can be, I want to be able to go hike Kilimanjaro. That can be that I have this ski trip coming up. It can be that I want to be able to get onto the floor and play with my grandkids, which I can't do right now. And so it's never the pain. Pain is always an indication of something else. And it's that something else that I want to get to the bottom of. And that kind of leads us back into what you were saying a moment ago about, we call it, the machine itself is called the Titron. It was invented in the 80s and perfected in the 90s. And I learned about it during the early 2000s and introduced it to my practice in 2010. And it's a computer program that is designed to, I call it like an electrician's line tester for your body. We're testing how much power is flowing through your nerve system. And it is your nerve system that helps you interact with the world, both internally and externally. It's your nerve system that's allowing you to see and hear me on this podcast, and each of you to speak as hosts of this podcast. It's your nerve system that allows you to do that. It's your nerve system that allows you to digest your food. And if you cut your finger on a piece of paper, instruct the body how to and to do the healing, which is to scab up, and then that scab disappears, the skin regenerates. And so that piece of equipment shows us exactly where the blockages are within the nerve system, which we need to adjust in order to remove, in order to restore communication, so that you function and heal the way that you're designed to heal. Because let's think about it. If we weren't designed to heal, if we did get that paper cut, ultimately we would bleed out, and that would not allow us to procreate and to sustain the population, right? So we are designed to heal. In that same concept of cutting your finger is an easy one to understand, but we also need to realize that it happens internally, millions upon millions of times over. And that's what keeps us all alive, because if that wasn't happening, none of us would be here to be having this conversation right now. And granted, we're all going to die at some point, but what we do between now and then is what makes all of the difference in the world. And that's where that exam comes in when people come into my office, because I want to know what it is that they're aiming for. What's their target for their health? What's their target for their life? So that when I see that scan, I can say, okay, this is how we're going to get to that. And this is how we can help you achieve what it is that you want to achieve.
Yeah, and it's a pretty simple process too. I mean, basically you just run whatever you call that down the spine and the back, and all of a sudden you're looking at it on the computer, and basically it's color coded. If it's one color, then you got a little bit of a problem. If everything is normal, then it's closer. And so it's painless, and it's very quick and right to the point. So
it's a great piece of technology, and it's just a simple handheld scanner that, like you said, we run it up the length of your entire spine, and the graphic comes up and shows us exactly where your subluxations are that we need to correct in order to help you out.
Nice. Now, most people, when they think of chiropractic, it's, I've taken a fall, been in the accident, as you had mentioned, and there's a focus on back pain, on arm pain, things like that. But in going through your website, I came across the section that you have titled Miracles. Can you tell us some of these stories?
Oh, that's asking me to really dig into my memory banks. There are a couple that stand out, though. When I was first in practice, this is always a hard one for me to tell, and I'll get to that in a moment. But when I was first in practice, we had a patient come in and ask me if I could help her grandson who was in a coma. And I was like, well, if he's subluxated, then I can help. And so I went to the ICU where this child was, who was 2 years old at the time. And speaking with mom and dad, they discovered that he had contracted what's called hantavirus, H-A-N-T-A, and basically causes swelling in the heart and lung cavities. And they said, we're out of options. The doctors said there's nothing they can do. He's got a 0% chance to live. Can you adjust him and do your thing, and we'll see what happens? I said, yeah, I can't make any promises. They said they understood. So I went in there, and it's an ICU. There's a 24-hour nurse watching over him, and I could see that there's this bump in his neck, at the top of his neck, where it meets the base of his skull, which we call a subluxation. And I'm thinking to myself, this child needs to get adjusted. So I kind of looked over and I adjusted him. And once I did, things all started beeping. And the nurse gets up, checks all of his leads, looks at me, he's like, well, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. Because I'm in a state that I don't have a license. I'm in a hospital I don't have privileges in. And so I look again, and there's no more subluxation. The child had cleared out, and I went home. And the next day I get a phone call that his vital statistics were up 10%. The respirator that he was on was doing all of the work the day before we adjusted him. and now he's doing 10% within a 24-hour period. Long story short, that child ended up recovering. He was dismissed from the hospital a couple of weeks later. He's now 21, married, has his own child. Just a great, great kid. And I know all of this because that was my nephew. That was my own mother who had said, Brian, can you help this child? Can you help your nephew? And it was my brother and my sister-in-law who said, Brian, we're out of options. Whatever you can do what you can do. And just talking to my nephew later on, like he described hearing my voice and then firecrackers going off inside of his head, and then he woke up. And this again, for a 2-year-old trying to describe what he experienced in a coma. And there have been others, but that is by far one that truly drives me, because not only was it a family member, but we talk about saving lives. And what does that mean to save lives? EMTs and ER doctors get tons of credit, deservedly, for saving people's lives because of the knowledge that they have and the actions that they take. But a lot of times saving a life has to do with the education that we give a child that'll prevent a situation that could be prevented. But nobody gets credit for that. The police officer who is able to turn a child away from a life of crime because of a conversation, doesn't get credit for that. And so that experience for me is really what drives me, because he was told he would never live, and now he is saving lives of thousands of other people because I get to tell his story. And for me, that makes all the difference in the world, because we all have to live our life. We all have to live life. And if we're not living our life, what are we doing? And so now he gets to live life because of something that I learned, and I was able to be in the right place at the right time to take a small little action like an adjustment to produce another generation. And so it's hard to talk about that sometimes, because it hits me every time I tell it. And there are other miracles which I could get into if you'd like me to. But his story is definitely the one that sticks out the most.
Yeah, talking about infants and children, I mean, it's never too young to start a regular program too. I mean, obviously, I think you've done that with your children, and you don't go in with a symptom. It's something that it's basically wellness based. So, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So, about a third of our practice is children, and most of those are parents who had heard us talk about what chiropractic is about. And so our youngest patient was a couple hours old when they received their first adjustment, other than my own kids. I've been invited into delivery rooms after the baby's been born, and to adjust children right there in the hospital. And it's all about getting started on the right foot. One of my goals in my practice when I first opened, and it still is to help educate kids on how it is to be healthy and what it means to be healthy, so that they can help avoid a lot of the problems my generation and your generations have experienced. Because if we're doing healthy things, we're going to get healthy results. It's that whole concept of garbage in, garbage out, good stuff in, good stuff out. So I take care of a lot of kids. I love taking care of kids. They bring an energy into the office that is infectious. And I use that word punning intentionally, but it's infectious. And, the smiles and the laughter that they bring in, it energizes us in the office. And parents start asking questions like, well, why are those kids being adjusted? What's wrong with them? And there's nothing wrong with them in the least. They're here because the parents want them to be well and get them started off on the right foot. I remember in our office one day, parent asked me, hey, what's wrong with that girl over there? And one of our patients, she's autistic. And I'm like, what do you mean, what's wrong with her? And she's like, well, is she being treated for her autism? And the parents were over with their daughters kind of listening in. They overheard the whole thing. And mom stands up and says, we want her to be as healthy as she can be. We know that she's never going to be, quote, normal, right? But that doesn't mean that she doesn't deserve to be healthy or as healthy as she can be. And so we get to have little interactions like that with people, which make a big difference on other people. And that's really what everything is about. It's all about relationship and building those relationships and teaching people, educating them about what it is to be healthy, because health is for everybody. We should all be able to be healthy and learn what that means, what it means to be healthy. And that's what we're here for.
So we've only got a few minutes left. So we've talked a lot about wellness and, the mindset of health. But for somebody who's just starting out, on this, who's made the decision that, yes, they want to get healthy, how do you recommend that they start?
The easiest way to get started is to just make a phone call into an office. Take the step. That first step is always the hardest, but picking up that phone, scheduling the appointment, going in for that initial consultation and evaluation process, and then heeding the words of your advisor. That's why we go to doctors. Doesn't matter whether it's a chiropractor or a medical doctor. But the funny thing is that we don't always follow the advice of our advisors, and that's one of the most foolish things that we could do, right? That's why we hired these people and pay these people and listen to these professionals while we can, when we need them. And so from there, it's just about going through the process. And everything is a process. I do prefer that Canadian pronunciation of that word, process, because it's an indication that we're moving in a forward, positive direction. And so just going through that process of whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's being and attending visits or doing exercise or meditating or eating, changing your dietary habits. And there's a whole list of things that we know of that are going to lead people down that road. But then doing the next step after that, and then the next step after that. Because when we sit still is when we can actually be falling backwards without realizing it. And so always taking another step and adding to our program, just like building a house. Chiropractic is the foundation of your house. You get your dietary and your exercise building the wall, and you get your meditations and things like that help you put your roof on, you put some windows on there, and you get to build a home. And that's really what health is, about building your home for your health and for your life, because you get to live in it.
Nice. If our listeners want to get some more information on your practice or schedule an appointment, how can they do so?
Yeah, there's two ways. They can call the office directly, 860-677-6401. If they would just like more information, our website is nardifamilychiropractic.com. NARDIFAMILYCHIROPRACTIC.com.
Fantastic. Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
I really love that last analogy, the house analogy. But the big takeaway, just as Dr. Nardi said, is to set up an appointment, just go in and talk. I mean, there's no obligation there, but this is something that people need to know about. And just like you want to go on an exercise program, proper diet, and so on and so forth, having your spine worked on so that your nervous system works properly is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I love the focus on staying healthy, not just getting healthy. And it is really all about having the right foundation. So, Dr. Nardi, thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. I've had a great time.
You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.